Welcome to Modern Management of the Older Adult, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence.
And my name is Kay Mayordomo. Welcome to the MMA podcast. I'm a physical therapist in Northern California, currently in Palo Alto, doing this from a park to get some outdoor time in the middle of the day in between patients. And I'm also a TA with the Older Adult Division of the Institute of Clinical Excellence. So today we are going to talk about the importance of making sure we're only using the T-score as a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the management of osteoporosis. We're going to talk about three things that also need to be part of the story. We're going to talk about the FRAX, we're going to talk about function, and we're going to talk about fall risk. So this podcast topic came about because I had a patient who I was treating for low back pain, and she was mentioning how she does have osteoporosis, and she recently got another DEXA scan and her T-score numbers were worse. And when she went to meet with her doctor told her, without any other information, to only lift 10 pounds. So she was told to only lift 10 pounds, where the backstory with this lady is we have been working on deadlifts and goblet squats and overhead presses because that's what her goals and the things she wants to do demanded of her. So for her doctor to tell her to only lift 10 pounds and not necessarily talk about how she can progress from there and just put a restriction did not sit well with me. So we are going to talk about how we can make sure we take a bigger picture, like get the whole story of the patient so that we can come up with a solid plan to help them manage osteoporosis. So first off, we're going to talk about the fracture risk assessment tool, the FRAX. The FRAX is pretty much a calculation tool where you input patient information such as their age, gender, sex, weight, height, whether they have a previous fracture history, if their parent had a fracture, if they're currently smoking, if they're taking glucocorticoids, if they have rheumatoid arthritis. So all of the other risk factors that can contribute to a diagnosis of osteoporosis. The thing with this is I think the T-score definitely gives us a good idea of what the patient's bone mineral density is currently, but I think where it lacks is knowing what fracture risk the patient has. So the FRAX, after you input all of this data, you're also putting in their femoral neck T-score in there. It comes up with a 10-year probability of a fracture. This doesn't mean that they're going to absolutely get a fracture, but this gives us an idea of how at risk is this patient based on their risk factors. And that'll help us come up with a plan on what to give them and how to progress them a little bit. The next thing is we want to make sure we're looking at their function. So we're looking at strength, we're looking at endurance, and we're looking at the patient's ability to tolerate impact and weight bearing to see how can we start them a lower extremity strength looks like, and then progressing that to maybe getting a 5 rep max if they're crushing it on the 30-second sit-to-stand test. We're also looking at endurance, so that could be a 2-minute walk test. It could be a 2-minute step test, could be a 6-minute walk test to give you a better idea and paint a picture of what their endurance looks like. And then impact wise, depending on if they're still having pain, sometimes things like hopping or heel drops, but are they able to do that? Sorry, I think the connection went off a little bit. So anticipatory. Are they able to go up on their heels? Are they able to do a sit to stand without losing their balance? We're looking at reactive postural control. So when they are out of their base of support, are they able to take a step in whichever direction they're falling into and catch themselves, or are they not able to do that? We're looking at the sensory orientation. So how does their ankle strategies, hip strategies, vestibular system, that kind of thing play a role into their fall risk? And then dynamic gait. So when we're throwing in different pieces to dynamic gait, so if the patient is unsteady with head turns or with changing direction while walking, are they more at risk for a fall? So I think the mini best test is also great at making sure that we can prescribe very specific things to what limitations they have. So that's why we love the mini best test in the older adult division. So the other thing is we want to make sure we're assessing their ability to do their usual activities. So what does gardening look like for them? Like if they had to do some weeding and bend forward and try to pull a weed, how steady do they look? How do they look when they're cleaning their house? How do they look when they're picking up groceries, stuff like that? So I think making sure you're not just looking at the T-score and being like, oof, that patient has a really, really low T-score, like -4. I think we should just limit everything. Like, I think that's the call. No, like we definitely don't want to do that. We want to make sure we get a broader view of what the patient needs to be able to do, where their current function is, and how we can bridge those things to get them more functional and more confident. Because the 10-year fracture risk, yes, one person may have a low fracture risk and have the same T-score as somebody who has a high fracture risk. But if we're not looking at all of those risk factors in the fracs, if we're not looking at their function, if we're not looking at their fall risk, then we may be missing a big piece of the puzzle in terms of how to manage it. Because we can definitely treat both patients really well. They don't have to just wait 10 years to get another DEXA scan to see how their bone mineral density is doing. We, as rehab providers, have a huge opportunity and potential to intervene and make sure the patient can have a lower fall risk, can get stronger and more confident in their activities so that they don't go backwards. And that also helps with bone mineral density. So there's a lot of wins going on here. So when we take these three things, when we take the fracs, patient's function, and their fall risk, we get a better idea of how to manage a patient's osteoporosis. Because yes, the T-score gives us a look into which bones are more impacted by osteoporosis, but the other three things give us a look into the risk factors that led to the osteoporosis diagnosis, what their fracture risk looks like in the next 10 years, and how we can positively affect them so they aren't just waiting and seeing what happens the next 10 years. If you want more on this topic with patient examples and everything, where I compare two patients with the same T-score, but different function, different fracs, different fall risk, please check out the virtual ICE I did last week. Should be online. If you are signed up for VICE, you can definitely take a look at that and have a more detailed version of this podcast. And also make sure to check out the older adult classes within the Institute of Clinical Excellence, because we go more in depth on outcome measures like the mini best test. We go on over specifics on osteoporosis management in level 2 online, and we go over specifics on training and loading principles in level 1 online. So our upcoming courses live is going to be in Burlington, New Jersey and Scottsdale, Arizona on September 27th to 28th. It's going to be in Salt Lake City, Utah on October 18th to 19th. And level 1 is going to be starting because we know that we're all in this mission to make sure our older adults get the best possible treatment from us as possible.
Thank you for listening to the MMOA podcast. If you found this helpful, please share with someone that could benefit. And if you're looking for more practical content to help you better serve older adults, head over to www.mmoa.online, where you can learn more about our free resources, our community, continuing education courses, and our certification. Once again, that's www.mmoa.online. Thanks for listening.